Hi there. In a previous video we added an associated author model to book. So instead of having the author as a string field on book, it's now an associated record. One thing that we forgot to do was change the create action, because all it does at the moment is tries to create book with the params. So it's probably going to fail. Now, to fix this, instead of jumping straight into the code and trying to make a fix, we're going to try a test-driven development approach. You might have seen it abbreviated to TDD, which basically means that we will run the tests first and then try to make the code pass and then repeat that cycle. So if I jump into the tests, I have the books controller tests, book spec. There we go. So we have the test in question here. This is testing the create action. So I can run that. And I'm just using a VS Code plugin which allows me to run specific tests. But you can, if you want to just type it into the command line to run a specific test, you just need to append colon line number at the end. So you can see we get this failure and it says author with an object ID expected got Andy Weir string. So basically what's happening is the book is expecting the author field to be an associated author object, but instead it's just getting a string. So that's what we need to fix. The first thing we need to do is reformat the params that we're sending. So you can see at the moment we make a post to API v1 books and we send the params nested under book. We send the title and the author, and the title is still correct, but the author is going to be wrong now because it's not a string. But in the API in the API request, we can't send an object, so we still have to send params. We still have to send string params. We just need to format them slightly differently. So my plan is that we will have the book params, and we'll also have the author params. And the idea is the title will be nested under the book params, and we'll have author first name Andy, author last name Weir, and I believe if we check the schema we also have an age. So I'm going to do age, not sure how old he is. Andy Weir, guessing he's in his 40s, 48. There we go. So now if I rerun the test, it will still fail, but we're now sending the params in a more correct way. You can see from this error message that it's not particularly clear what's happening. It just says this is the request that was made and we expected the book count to change, but it did not change. So if we want to get some more information about this, what we can do is go to the books controller and we can add a breakpoint. So I like to use binding.irb because it's built into Rails without any external gems. And if I run the test again, you can see that I'm basically dropped into an IRB session right at the start of the controller where I did the breakpoint. And so we have the books params, which now just have the title. And if we run this line, you can see the problem is that the author ID is nil, and that's required to save this model. So if I ask Rails whether this model is valid to be saved, it's not. So what we need to do is create the author before we create the book, and then use the author when we create the book, if that makes sense. So what we could do is, at the start of this controller here, I'll remove the breakpoint and I'll create an author. So it'll be author create, and I would use author params, which would be very similar to book params. Oops. So that would be fetched from the params, only we would require it from the author hash, and we would permit first name, last name, and age. So now the controller is, the first thing it's going to do is try to create an author with the new params that we are passing in. And once we've done that, we need to actually assign this author to the book. So you might think we could do author, you might think that we could do that, but unfortunately we can't, because this new method expects to take just one hash, and we're already passing a hash in here. So what we need to do is merge the author into the book params. So we can do merge author ID, author ID. So we can't really merge a whole object into a hash, so instead we'll just use an ID, and Active Record is smart enough to be able to work with either an ID or an object. So again, what we're doing is creating an author based on the new params, and then we are merging that author into the book params, so that when we create the book, it should actually have the author. So I'm going to exit out of the IRB session from the breakpoint, and I'm going to run the tests again. And there we go, we have a passing test. Now, just to tidy things up, we should also jump down to the book params here, and you'll see that we're still expecting the author to be, or we're still permitting the author to be passed in the book params, but we don't want to do that anymore. We only want to allow the title of the book to be posted, and all of the author params will be nested under the author object. Now let's jump back over to the spec, and there's one last thing that we should do, which is our original test was making an expectation on the book count. So we say when we make this post request, we expect the number of books in the database to change from 0 to 1. But we're also now changing the author database count, because when this API request gets made, we create an author in the database. So what I'm going to do is add a new line at the bottom of this test and say expect author.count to equal 1. So we know that the author count at the start of the test is 0, and at the end of the test it should be 1. Okay, hopefully you learned something about TDD, test-driven development, and how you can use that to build out controllers, but it also applies to any part of a Rails application. And also that you learn something about how to write Rails controllers which create multiple records. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.